Hey Christy, I wanted to give you a quick video along with the notes for this week because I'm veering pretty much completely off from the booklet. Like I said, I didn't love the booklet. I'm sorry that happened the first week that you're leading a life group. You should still read it. If you like it, feel free to follow it much more closely than I do, but I just didn't find it super fruitful. And so watch this video, look over the notes I have, but you have a lot of freedom. You and Josh both, I trust you guys. That's why you're in the position you are. So you have the freedom to take stuff out, to add stuff in, to go a completely different direction. But I want to provide you guys always with something to go off of. I want to give you help unless we've talked ahead of time about you developing your own lesson and wanting to work on that. I want to give you guys at least a starting point or some idea of where I want to take things. So I'm going to start out tonight, or I'm planning to open up with some discussion. I just want to hear back from students about the mornings of prayer that we've been taking as a student ministry for about 6 months now. And I just want to get some feedback on that. Has that been helpful? Has that made a difference in your life? What parts of it are helpful? What parts of it are not? Are there things that you wish we would do more? I've listed those questions for you there. So just get feedback from students on that. I like to do this regularly. I like to hear back from students. Obviously, we're not going to take everything that they say and apply it. We get weird feedback sometimes, but we do also get some good feedback, and it's good to hear back from students and show them that we really do care whether what we're trying to do is effective or not. So if you would, please take notes during this time. You don't have to write down everything, but things, good, helpful feedback, please write that down and send it to me because I would like to know what the middle schoolers say. And then you can kind of close out that opening discussion time with asking students if they want to share anything that's helped them personally in their own prayer life, kind of outside of what we've been trying to do. If there are steps or measures that they've taken that they think are helpful and good to share with the group, let them do that. And then you can kind of transition into the lesson. And we're going to open tonight by talking about desire. Again, that's in the question, what if I don't desire to pray? And we've been talking about that a lot the past couple weeks, but I want to dig one layer deeper into the soil tonight. And there's actually a specific passage that I want us to look at that has to do with prayer that I think brings this up. And so I've highlighted questions for you on the notes in orange. You'll see that. But you want to ask them, can you guys think of maybe the most famous passage in the New Testament where a group of people are struggling to pray? They're struggling with the desire to pray. And this question helps keep conversation going, but it also, these first two questions in orange, I think it's valuable to ask questions that are even that simple. You could just tell them, let's go to Matthew 26 and look at Peter, James, and John in the garden. But I think by asking this question, it helps highlight what students don't know about Scripture, and it helps show them that we're expecting them to know some things, that we want them to know general biblical questions. I remember a class I had in seminary. The professor would always start half of a verse and then stop and expect for us to finish the verse. And he would do this all the time. And I remember thinking, I don't know most of these verses that he's expecting me to be able to finish the second half. I can't do that. And it kind of instilled in me a desire to be better at that, to know Scripture better, because my professor is expecting that I'm going to know these verses. And so I think these first two questions do that a little bit for our students. These are questions that are easy enough that they very well could know, and I would say should know. And so we want to highlight that. But anyways, it's Peter, James, and John in the garden when they fall asleep. And you're going to ask them, what does Jesus say when he returns and he finds them sleeping? And he specifically talks to Peter, and he says, watch and pray that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And I did a brief word study on the word willing. It's only used 3 times. 2 of the times are in this passage and a parallel passage in Mark. But the other time, and there's some flair and flavor in this word that I kind of had I thought there might be. a flare of kind of desire and eagerness to it. The third place that it's used is Romans 1:15, where Paul says, I'm eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. And so it's not just like will you wash the dishes? Yes, I'm willing to do that. Like, yes, I can do that. It's a little bit stronger than that, of not just, sure, I'll do that. It's I'm eager. I kind of want to do that. So Jesus is saying your spirit wants to, but your flesh is weak. You have some desire, but it's not strong enough to overcome your flesh. And this is, I'm sure, as you know, really common all over Scripture. Romans 8, Galatians 5 talk a lot about this. The desires of the Spirit are set against the desires of the flesh to keep you from doing what you want to do. And then it lists the fruits of the Spirit. And so if you walk in the Spirit, you'll have a desire for these things and pursue them. If you walk in the flesh, you'll go this way. Romans 7, Paul says he has the desire to do good, but he doesn't have the ability to carry it out. So give a brief explanation of all that. You can go into as much or as little detail as you want with those middle school students if you follow this outline. And then get down to kind of what does this mean? What's the reality for us? And the reality is that as Christians, you likely have a desire, some form of desire to pray. Most Christians, all Christians, probably have a little bit of an inkling of a desire to pray. We know that we should. We know that it's powerful. We know it's important. We know it's effective. We wish that we were better at praying, but we're not. And it kind of comes back to what happens in the garden, is that that desire is there, but it's not strong enough to overcome our desire to watch TV more often or talk with friends or sleep in a little bit longer. It's there. We have a desire, but it's not quite strong enough. And then I have this tough love piece that you don't have to say if you don't feel comfortable saying this, but I do think it's true and it's important for our students to consider this as often as we can, as often as it fits to bring it up. If you don't have a desire at all to pray, like if you're a student and you're sitting here while we're talking about this and you're like, I could care less if I pray, like I really don't care if I pray, I don't really see it as valuable, I don't really have any desire at all to pray, you're either probably really, really far from the Lord at that point in your life, or you don't know the Lord at all. The Spirit that lives in us brings along some desire to pray, and we have to increase that, and the Spirit plays a role in that. But if there's no desire there at all, that's a scary place to be. Warning lights should be going off. If you have zero desire to pray, that's a bad sign, and could be a sign that you don't actually know the Lord, even though you may think you do. Kind of coming out of this, what we need, the conclusion is we need an increase in our desires. And this is something that I actually had in the lesson last week. I think Josh maybe addressed it with the high schoolers. I don't think we covered it with the middle schoolers, but ask this question of, do you guys think it's possible for us to change or grow our desires? Can you increase your desire for how much you want something or how much you value something? Or can you go from not wanting something to wanting something? Can you just make yourself change what you want? Try to encourage them to really think critically on this. It's a difficult question. I want some engagement from students. Don't just feed them the answer right away. Re-ask the question if you have to. Give it some time. Sit on it. But I think the answer is partially yes and partially no. And you can think of your own example. There's a ton of different examples. Any kind of sales job would be a decent example. You could use like a car salesman. When you go in to buy a car, what that salesman is trying to do is to increase your desire for that car. And so you go and you drive it and you come back and that salesman is like, here's the price of the car, here's the value, and they want to get you to want the car enough to pay that price. And so they start listing all the features, and they say it's got heated seats, and you didn't know that, and it's got extra trunk space. You lift up this hatch, and it's got more space down there, and these are things that you didn't know. If there are things that you value, then that will grow your desire for that car. You'll say, man, I liked the car, but now that I know it had heated seats, that makes me like it a little bit more. But you could walk in and that salesman could say it's got heated seats and extra trunk space, and if you don't care about those things, nothing moves. You don't want the car anymore. So you've learned more about the car, but you just don't care. And so the salesman says it's got heated seats, and you say, I don't really care if it has heated seats. That doesn't matter. So there's an element to where I think we can increase our desire by increasing our knowledge of the value and the importance of things, and by learning new things that we didn't know before. But there's also this scenario where we could learn something new and not care about it, and so then it makes no difference at all. And that, I think, that transfers directly into Christianity and will probably make more sense as we go along. So that's kind of the conclusion I want you to get to. Yes, you can change your desires in some sense, but there's also a sense that even if you're learning new things, you know more about something, if you don't care about it, nothing happens, nothing changes. And so as Christians, we kind of need this twofold approach. We got to pray for the Spirit to intervene and to make us want and desire and be more willing to pray. We got to pray that, actually I'll get to that in a minute. So we have to pray for outside help. In order to increase our spiritual desires, we can't just make that happen on our own. We actually need divine help for that to be a reality. And then the second thing we can do is we can explore more about prayer. We can find areas where we might be deficient in our knowledge and understanding of prayer. We can look at these extra features that prayer has that are really valuable and important. And as we behold those and begin to trust those, our desire for prayer should increase. So there are kind of two steps that we want to take to increase and improve our desire to pray. And the first one is simple. If you're a Christian, you already have that seed of desire to pray, and you can pray for more desire. Pray to God. You can specifically pray over this step number 2. Pray that God would open your eyes to really value prayer in a new way. I think this is the way many Christians maybe feel about prayer. They need God to actually open their eyes to see the value of it. They may know in theory all of the benefits that Scripture says. They may know that Scripture calls them to do it, but they actually need new eyes to see that and actually care and actually value it. And you can pray that as you begin to take baby steps and start to pray, that God would increase your awareness of how fruitful and impactful that is being on your life, that God would fill you with peace as you pray, and so that would increase your desire. If you are feeling peace when you cast your anxieties on the Lord, that's going to increase your desire to go back to the Lord and pray again. So we can pray and plead with God to change and increase our desires. But I don't think you were at the rendezvous this last Sunday, but we talked about last week how leaning and depending on God is a crucial element of Christianity. And when we talked about what leaning and depending on God looks like on a day-to-day fashion, and we said it doesn't look like us bossing God around and saying, God, I want to be holy. Would you change that? I want you to save this person over here. Would you go do that? It looks more like us praying earnestly for these things, like an increase in desire to pray. And then us going out and working and toiling and struggling and doing all that we can in our efforts to make that happen, and trusting and depending that God is going to come alongside us and actually work in us and through us. We pulled that from Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 15:10, that he worked harder than all of them, so he worked hard, but it was not I, but Christ working in me. And so Paul goes out and he works hard, and he trusts that Christ is going to actually make that work effective. So what that means for us here is that we don't just sit back and pray that God would give us more desire to pray. We do that, absolutely, and then we go out and we do all that we can to increase our desire on our own and trust that God is going to come alongside us and actually give the growth. So what else can we do? What are ways that we can explore prayer more that might increase our desire? And I think a good question to ask here is, what are some reasons people lack the desire to pray? What are some reasons that people don't see the value of prayer? And you can add to this list, you can riff off of what middle schoolers bring up if you think it's appropriate and biblical. But I kind of broke it into 3 categories, and I'll let you go through this and try to cut this video off short. But I broke it into 3 big categories. People don't desire to pray because they don't believe. We see that all over the gospel. Jesus says, you of little faith, when people are hesitant to trust him, hesitant to pray. So lack of faith is a big one. I imagine a lot of students will say that, but press further into that about what specifically do people not believe about God and about prayer that makes them reluctant to do it or doesn't move them. And I think I've listed some of here, the real beliefs and doctrines that people doubt that directly affects how much they value prayer. And I'll give a handout with a couple of verses for each of those bullet points. And you can read 1 or 2 of those if you want with students and have time, or you can just hand that out to students and say, hey, if you don't believe that God is sovereign over all things, take this sheet, read these verses, and hopefully that will increase your awareness that God really is in control of everything. And if he is in control of everything, then I ought to pray because he can change things, and prayer is effective. So people lack faith. That hinders their desire to pray. People lack the knowledge of just how to pray. That's what our whole series is built on. Upstairs, that's what the disciples came to Jesus and they said, teach us how to pray. We don't know how to pray. And that's a common problem for Christians. I would say it's never totally solved. You're never going to perfectly know how to pray, but we can increase our understanding of that through reading the Word, seeing how other people prayed, seeing what God really values and what he wants us to pray for. We can learn through hearing other people pray, actively hearing. So when people pray on Sunday mornings, we shouldn't be zoning out, thinking about other things. We should pay attention. How does Craig pray? How does Zach pray? How does Wes pray? How do people downstairs, when we're doing prayer mornings, how does the person leading that topic, how do they pray? That teaches us how to pray a little bit better. And then our principle downstairs is that in a large part you learn through doing, you learn through actually praying. And the more often that you pray, the more comfortable you'll get with that discipline. The last things, people don't pray, they don't have a desire to pray because they just run out of things to say. Here, if you know the Word, that's helped me tremendously. Just praying through the Word, praying verses back to God is incredibly fruitful, gives you a lot of things to say. There's, of course, a lot in the Bible that we can pray back to the Lord. Another thing that I think is hugely important is to be involved in spiritual things. I think a lot of American Christians struggle to pray because they're not doing anything spiritual in their lives. And so they just feel like whenever I pray, I'm just praying, thanks for providing for me financially, keep me safe, which are good things to pray for, but they just end up praying the same thing every day. Thank you for this food. The more active our lives become spiritually, the more I think we'll have to pray about. That's been true of my life. I kind of cheat because I'm a youth pastor, but I have so much that I could pray for. I can pray for all of our students. I can pray for all of our volunteers. I can pray for the Rendezvous. I can pray for life groups. I can pray for our pastors here at the church or other staff members. So the more we're involved in youth group, in service projects, the more we know our mission partners, the more we're plugged in spiritually, we won't end up running out of things to pray for. I think that's really important to point out. And then lastly, you can just set aside time. Most people, if you really took the time to retreat for just a couple minutes and think about things that you needed to pray over, you would have a decent list. So again, that's my outline. That's my lesson. Sorry the video went so long. Feel free to change what you want or go a totally different direction. But I hope this is helpful for you. Let me know if you have any questions.